All right, I'd like to bring in today's agenda panel. Victoria DeFrancesco Soto, an MSNBC contributor, professor at the University of Texas. Erin Carmone from MSNBC.com, and Sabrina Siddiqui with the Huffington Post. Sabrina, I want to start with you, and you guys can also feed off of anything that Elise just said as well. But the HuffPost just came out with a new poll for the anniversary of Roe versus Wade, and it made some interesting finds when it comes to attitudes on abortion. Just give us a few of the highlights, maybe what was surprising here.
Sure. Well, we have a new poll done in collaboration with YouGov that shows that while Americans continue to be fairly evenly split in terms of how they view abortion from an ideological perspective, a growing number of Americans don't believe that the government has a place in determining what a woman's access to abortion should be. So 64% of respondents actually said that decisions on abortion should be made between a woman and her doctor, whereas just 24% of respondents said that the government has a right or obligation to pass new restrictions on abortion. Moreover, it was only 35% of respondents that said that they would favor Congress passing new restrictions on abortion. So while it's true that Republicans have a state-level advantage that has enabled them to pass a growing number of laws that would restrict women's access to abortion across the country, those views are increasingly out of step with the American public.
Well, again, let's build on this, Erin, because MSNBC.com has some graphics on the website with some of these statistics. One compares abortion laws in the year 2000 compared to 2013. Now, the dark color represents states most hostile to abortion rights, and you can see it's about doubled. Now, if, as we've talked about, more people want the government to stay out of this issue, and again, I'm asked the same question I asked Elise, why is this happening?
Right. Well, I mean, I think Elise mentioned that there has been a strategy. A lot of places in which the anti-abortion movement first tried, especially at the Supreme Court, it failed. What they realized is that the Supreme Court did open the door for them to pass a certain number of restrictions that would place roadblocks in women's ways. So technically, even in states where it's technically legal, there are all sorts of restrictions that fall into a legal gray area where abortion is legal, but it's extremely onerous and difficult, particularly for low-income women who live in remote places like the Rio Grande Valley, where clinics have closed thanks to the restrictions passed in Texas. Right. So I think that they're realizing that with federal gridlock, with a certain limit to what they can do from the court's perspective, there's a lot that they can do to make life more difficult for women who are seeking abortion.
And how they frame it. Vicki, I don't know if you saw this, and you could chime in on what you just heard, but also a Louisville radio station reporting that Kentucky State Rep Joe Fisher, who's a Republican, he amended a domestic violence bill to include language limiting abortions at 20 weeks. He says abortion is, quote, the most brutal form of domestic violence. How do you react to that?
You know, Brian, abortion, like with most issues, is a local issue. Again, echoing what Erin said. And I think that what we need to do going forward is slug it out at the state level. I think Democrats sometimes tend to not focus so much on the midterm elections, and we see our big turnouts for our presidential elections, especially among Latinos and youth, core constituencies of the Democratic Party that don't turn out. So if we want to see the essence of Roe v. Wade recaptured, we need to start at the state house level, and we need to mobilize constituencies that don't tend to turn out, because this is the only way we're going to have a blockade toward those infringement of choice rights.
Well, you know, and I could talk more about this, but I want to take a bit of a turn because it's obviously related. At least one of you mentioned how out of touch you think the Republican Party is. And so, Sabrina, I'll put it to you. How is the Republican Party going to appeal to more contemporary women with this kind of stance? I mean, how are they going to win those votes?
Well, I think that the Republican National Committee has certainly talked about the need to appeal to women. At the same time, they are also considering a resolution this week that would urge candidates to stand their ground on abortion and defend their position on abortion. I think, you know, with respect to congressional Republicans, one of the problems they face is that lawmakers are under a constant threat of facing a primary challenge, and a very real primary challenge. So that has prevented them from sort of moderating their position on abortion. At the same time, I think that they're sort of trying to train their candidates not to at least make comments that would offend women. We've all heard about, you know, the training to not talk about rape and come up with other ways to talk about why they're pro-life and sort of defend that stance. I don't think we're going to see any shift in policy, certainly not in a midterm election year, which, as others mentioned, is a turnout election. It's about making sure that the base comes out and votes.
You know, I think the rhetorical change to make it more of an economic issue as opposed to social, in some ways, you know, it makes more sense, because when they talk about the social side of it, that's when they get into real trouble with the average American. But Erin, I want to want to put this to you because Americans United for Change, they brought out a Tea Party scorecard that's described as a tool for voters to hold Republicans accountable for aligning themselves with the Tea Party. And basically, it seems like that's another way to get people who are more moderate to not be moderate. I mean, it's almost getting impossible for a Republican to be in the center, right?
Right. Well, and I think that one way in which our two discussions mesh is that abortion is an issue that they all agree on. You know, they have tactical issues amongst themselves. Even some of those quote-unquote more moderate Republicans don't have such ideological differences from the self-avowed Tea Partiers. It's more how willing are they to put to a grinding halt the functions of a government, as we saw last year. So I think one of the reasons, actually, even in the House of Representatives, which knows that it's going to get roadblocked by the Senate and the President on many measures, including those restricting a woman's right to choose, is that it's one of the few consensus items in which there isn't a lot of ideological or strategic disagreement. It's really just a matter of rhetoric and focus. And as for, you know, abortion as an economic issue, which absolutely reproductive freedom is an economic issue, so far all I've really heard from Republicans is that they think that restricting a woman's access to abortion is going to create more jobs because there are going to be more babies. And that's not necessarily what I would consider a sound economic theory, but I'm open to being persuaded.
I mean, Vicki, you think that the Republicans, they're not done here, that they could get some real traction in the midterms, isn't that right?
You know, with the issue of women, they definitely have a black eye there, but they're going to be trying to distract the general electorate from the issue of women. And I think two of those issues are immigration, where we see some signals that the Republican Party wants to move forward. Of course, it's not going to be a comprehensive reform type of immigration, but some movement. Also, recent talk about school vouchers. And these are two elements that George W. Bush put into place during the 2000s and was able to moderate the party. Obviously, it's not going to be a 180, but we do see some movement. But I think the most important factor is that we see some establishment Republicans getting ready to play offense toward that Tea Party extreme. I don't know if it's going to be effective or not. We'll know in March. But we do have the Roves and the other moderate Republicans saying, don't keep turning us further right because we're never going to win elections at the national level.
I just want to say, you know, I've for on air, you know, when they had the budget deal with Paul Ryan and Boehner slapping back at the Tea Party, it looked like there was an opening there for some moderation, but then it seems like it hasn't gotten a whole lot of momentum. Guys, we appreciate it. MSNBC contributor Victoria DeFrancesco Soto, MSNBC.com's Erin Carmone, and the Huffington Post's Sabrina Siddiqui. If I butchered any of your names, I apologize to your parents.